I'm gonna do the presentation in English, in deference of Professor Moglen. Welcome again. We're very happy to have him here. We had Professor Moglen a couple of years ago on occasion of the version 3 of the GPL license. That was 2005 or 2006. And we're very happy to have him again here. I'm sure you all know him. Professor Eben Moglen is Professor of Law at Columbia University, and he's also the president of the Software Freedom Law Center. For those who are not familiar with these terms, I'm sure you all are familiar with them. The Software Freedom Law Center is a foundation or a law firm, you will tell us more later, devoted to spreading the word of a changing world. Professor Moglen has been working together with Richard Stallman for 20 years. Their friendship goes way back. And he is responsible not only for providing the free software movement some solid legal ground, but also a lot of ideology. Now with this Software Freedom Law Center, Professor Moglen is traveling around the world, spreading the word, as I was saying, spreading the word for the revolution of the free software and of all this change, Web 2.0, and all these software communities changing the world and the way we do and approach things. But in addition to spreading the word and changing the world, Professor Moglen is Professor of Legal History at Columbia. So he teaches legal history and he teaches internet law. One might always be amazed to say or to ask how these two come together, history and internet. Well, I would like to think, and I'm sure I'm right when thinking of it because I had him as a law professor back long when I was studying at Columbia. He's in a very good position to see revolutions happening. He knows so much about history. He knows so much about revolutions that he has this wonderful background to see things coming. And well, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new when saying that it's a pleasure to listen to him because there's so much history he knows and there's so much in visionary future that he can enlighten us all with his thoughts. So thank you very much for being here. I'm not going to talk anymore because I'm just talk too much always, but we're very happy to have him here. Please delight us with your visionary future.
There are some introductions it's very difficult to live down. Good morning. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. I want to thank the UOC and my colleagues and friends here for the invitation, and I want to apologize for speaking English. Some years ago, about the time that the work I was doing on public key encryption and its control by the United States government began to make purchase, and we could see that the empire was going to surrender. And when the war on these Microsoft guys was still an impossibility and not an inevitability, I realized that I was coming to the conclusion that capitalism produces inherently defective technology. And I thought this was an insight that I had arrived at independently. Though, of course, as you are all aware, there is no such thing as an original idea. And very shortly after having this supposedly original idea, I discovered one day, quite by accident, that I had been anticipated by Rosa Luxemburg, who had had the same idea roughly 75 years earlier and in better form. Nonetheless, it's an idea worth having for the first time if it hasn't previously occurred to you. The difficulty presented to technology by capitalism is the extraordinary short-sightedness of the profit motive, which inevitably requires the sacrifice of long-term technological goals to the pursuit of short-term, temporary, one-sided and usually defective economic understandings of what will turn a quick profit. The fate of the earth now hinges on the defectiveness of capitalism's embrace of the gasoline-powered internal combustion engine. And we are, I think, dealing here today with an equivalent illustration, more quick and more deadly, and therefore more important to understand in its fullness. The network, in the view of the technologists, connects computers. The network, in the reality of our world, connects people. And it is upon the terms on which the network connects people that the social life of the 21st century will be lived. But it is, of course, a technologically intermediated social life, and the technology of intermediation is controlled to its injury by capitalism. My theme this morning is simply to show a few of the most important respects in which the current technology is grievously misstructured, and to anticipate a few of the negative social effects, while it is still possible, not only possible indeed, but likely, that by concerted effort we could change the technology and escape some of the inevitable harms. To begin with, then, I should define a little bit this question of what we mean when we talk about social networking or social software. We live in a structure of knowledge now, which we tend, when we are thinking about it even halfway technically, to call the web. And by the web, we mean technology originally intended to encourage scientific cooperation. A structure invented, if any idea can ever be said to be original, at CERN, and designed to allow physicists and others improved access to technological work occurring at a speed too rapid for the publishing system in physics and high-energy physics in particular to keep up. And so Tim Berners-Lee and his colleagues at CERN began the process of using the network to keep scientists informed of one another's work faster and with less overhead than the traditional publication system of science. Note that this was an entirely socialist undertaking, because anything as serious as high-energy physics and the attempt to understand the beginning of the universe is never pursued by capitalism, only by socialism. And in the socialized world of government-funded and government-supported research, the attempt to connect scientists faster and more comprehensively than the Gutenberg capitalist publication system could accomplish was, of course, both foreseeable and doable. The design of the net in its web form, we are now supposed to call it Web 1.0, but in fact it's the only web we have. The design of the web assumed some socialist characteristics: the absence of advertising, the absence of a requirement for surveillance, the absence of a requirement to know what everybody reads and when they read it and why they're reading it and what else could be sold to them because they've read it, and the assumption of cooperating agents, all seeking one another's overall good. Such a vision of the web can still, of course, be found in the social software we call, for example, the Wikipedia, a socialist activity built around the idea that there need be no advertising, no surveillance, no interference with the autonomy of agents, no need to know who reads what, when, and how, and on an assumption of cooperative consensus building directed at the public overall good. The Wikipedia is read more every day than the Wall Street Journal, just in case you wanted to know. And it is presently, in English, both the largest and the fastest growing reference library or encyclopedia in existence. So much for the failures of socialism. What we call social networking at the present moment, represented largely by the offerings we know as MySpace, owned by Rupert Murdoch, Facebook, owned at present by a congerie of private investors, including Microsoft and the Central Intelligence Agency, Orkut, owned by Google. What we mean by social networking is a structure for subverting the web in the interest of capitalist goals, the requirement of constant advertising, the requirement of complete surveillance, the requirement of a certainty concerning who reads everything and when and how they read it, with the determination to make further economically valuable use of that information. Valuable, that is, not to the people living in the social network, but rather to its operators. Just a moment or two on the technology of this transformation, which we are calling social networking. You are perhaps now accustomed to at least one of these environments, MySpace or Facebook or Orkut or one of its equivalents. People who use these services create profiles, what once upon a time we would have called home pages, which give some indications of their interests, their concerns, their hobbies, the music they prefer, whatever it is that they wish to share with a broader environment around them. These profiles are then linked to various sub-programs, functions, applets, objects on the screen, whatever you may think of them as being, which allow for exchange of messages, the posting of little informational snippets, the information about what books I am reading or buying, what movies I've recently attended or particularly liked, and so on. These are very heavily used environments. We are talking now about tens of millions and soon hundreds of millions of people per service. Nations, if you like, in their size and in their belief that they are connected in a common purpose. Not a purpose in which each individual identity shares a single objective, but in the purpose of creating a self-understood identity. I am at MySpace, you are at Facebook. In the United States, we are beginning to have some descriptive sociology about who adheres to which networks, with, you might be unsurprised to hear, the conclusion that there are class distinctions. Persons of higher educational status, persons who have attended major American universities, people who have higher income status and degrees, let us say just for the moment, Obama voters, are to be found at Facebook. In general, persons with working class backgrounds, lesser degrees of education, higher degrees of manual labor, and a greater interest in independent rock music, let us call them for the moment Hillary Clinton voters, are to be found at MySpace. Of course, that isn't quite right because the age distinctions between those two candidates in American politics are not mirrored in the social networks, but patience, we shall get there. Mr. Murdoch is trying. I point out this national characteristic of the networks, this tendency to see the people within it as a people rather than just people, because I think it's a necessary element in the trouble that I perceive on its way towards us. But I'm describing now technology rather than its social consequences. All of the social networks, Facebook, MySpace, Orkut, they have this in common. From a technician's point of view, they add nothing but convenience to the available powers and features of the web before their creation. In essence, each of the social networks that we presently have represents what web designers would call a content management system, designed to make it easy for people to produce what they could otherwise produce themselves, with a common look and a common feel and a common aesthetic, which in all cases is intolerably low. That is to say, the design of those as visual entities is by no means admirable, and nobody admires it. It is merely simple. It is merely standard. It is merely conventional. The ability to produce a web page quickly and to provide on that web page certain standard features, features which allow for a common interface for each user, features which allow for messages and music lists and what I am reading and what I am buying to be quickly constructed. Those technological elements of the social network are desirable but cheap. Indeed, in the world in which I and my clients exist, they're free. That is to say, every single element of the technology made available by these networks is available to anyone who wants to use it anywhere in the world at no cost, all the time, using software we have already made and are giving away. The value in the social networks does not lie with their users. The value in the social networks lies behind the scenes, to the operators and those with whom they deal. What has turned out to be the most valuable information in the World Wide Web to capitalism is the information which is contained in the logs of servers. Information which is kept as an ordinary consequence of servers interacting with the net around them. Information about who connects when, to which page on the server, at what time, and for how long. This information was originally simply a byproduct of the building of the web. Well-behaved software keeps logs of what it does to enable those who maintain it to understand what is going on. Well-behaved software creates logs so that its use can be optimized, so that it can be understood where the software is spending its time and what can be done to make that software more efficient, to produce more service in a finite time at finite cost. Web server logs were originally, therefore, antecedent to the business of managing the web, but they had no role in the web itself, not that socialist institution for the encouragement of cooperation among consenting and cooperating parties. The reason that web server logs are now regarded as valuable is that they represent a durable trace of everything done by everybody who interacts with web servers. Everything you do when you interact with Google or Yahoo or MSN is logged. And those logs are subjected to what we call data mining, which means getting data to answer questions you didn't know well enough to ask. The development of unintended questions, the declaration of patterns in data not yet grasped by humans, is the project of data mining. And web server logs, with their extraordinarily deep, capacious, and durable development of information about human behavior, is the ideal form of data for data mining. What is done behind your back with all of that data concerning your interactions with services, search services and social services and purchasing services, what is done with all of that data is to construct a model of you. I don't mean a model of people, I mean a model of you. A prediction about your behavior. A prediction about your behavior over the long term and over the short term. Let us take a simple example of the use of data mining. Let us call it Disneyland. Disneyland is a place. It's several places around the world, as you're well aware. But it's also a virtual destination, a destination to which particularly children are supposed to imagine themselves going. The purpose of Disneyland is to get a lot of money out of people in a short period of time. And the purpose of Disneyland is to make you go there as often as possible. Currently, if you visit Disneyland as a child, when your parents buy your admission ticket, a file is opened on you. Every single piece of purchasable information about you is purchased for that file, and ABC Disney maintains that information for a lifetime. The purpose of that information is to stimulate future visits to Disneyland. Currently, if you are taken to Disneyland as a child, the average is that you will revisit the place between 2 and 3 additional times in life, once to bring children and once to bring grandchildren. The goal of the data mining conducted on you as a visitor to Disneyland is to raise that number by 1. That is, to induce 1 additional visit per lifetime to Disneyland. Euro Disney's existence depends upon that additional 1, because the theme park business in Europe cannot survive without an increase in visiting, as you are probably aware. The result is that every piece of information that can be bought about you for the remainder of your life will be mined in order to discover the moment at which you would be most vulnerable to an invitation to visit Disneyland, not with a child or a grandchild. The goal is to locate the moment at which, by an intervention, a discount, an advertisement, your friend just went to, or you'd like to plan your event at, or wouldn't you like to get married at, or something that they believe you will be acceptably ready to receive, you will receive a solicitation which will move you there. It is worth keeping track of every single human being who has ever visited Disneyland, given the low cost of data, the low cost of memory, and the low cost of data mining, to keep track of you for a lifetime solely in order to induce 1 additional sale. Now we are beginning to understand the extraordinary value of capitalism in the construction of technology. Because, of course, it is the desire of that great institution, Disney ABC, with all of its control over media, not just in the United States, but elsewhere in the world, to induce that 1 additional visit by keeping track of you as an individual for a lifetime. The technology of the web, to the extent that media and its partner, Microsoft, can achieve it, the purpose of the web becomes to keep track of you in order to stimulate purchases. Now let us look at the social networks with this in mind. My students, your children, lots of people whom you know who are under, let us say, the age of 30 or 25, have moved a large portion of their lives into the social networks as they have ceased to use anything other than a cell phone. Their life in the social network allows them to keep track of one another and to plan events together very easily. Neither Raquel nor I would have recognized this, but the Columbia Law School LLM program is at present held together by the Facebook pages, where the weekend's activities are planned, where shopping trips are organized, where students keep track of one another's love affairs, where the movement of status from looking to in a relationship is the first thing that people check every morning about all those people they are checking out every morning. Conventionally, of course, it is said among the people who have left the 20-something period and have begun their life as young married people that MySpace and Facebook are really just singles bars. And it is true that the desire for sex is a primary reason that people bring themselves into the networks. But note that capitalism is very experienced at making use of the desire for sex, which it has learned to, in all its nuances, take advantage of and sell. What is really happening to those people is that everything that they do and everything they think about doing and everything they discuss with one another is monitored, surveilled, and data mined. You ask yourself why the CIA would be bothering to invest in Facebook, and you get a quick and easy answer. These content management systems are actually surveillance systems you choose to live in, not just get occasionally surveilled by. You choose to move into them, and once you are inside, everything you do becomes part of the model of everything you might do next. None of this is necessary, but all of it is profitable. And so we begin to ask ourselves, how does the technology of capitalism alter the very way in which we live? The technology of capitalism says that rather than providing you with a web server you can control, you are provided instead with the opportunity to borrow a web server at the apparent price of zero and at the actual price of submitting yourself to permanent, contemporaneous, real-time surveillance. And in addition, you subject your memory to the control of someone else. 2 years ago, a student in one of my classes came to me and told me the following story. She was a heavy user of MySpace, as many of her law school classmates then were. She had a very bad breakup with her boyfriend, and she decided that she did not want to remain on MySpace and be aware of all of his activities with his new girlfriend, and so she dropped off MySpace, took out her page, and left the social network altogether. The problem was that she was the photo keeper for her social group. She had been keeping 18,000 or 20,000 photographs of their lives together, and they had been on her MySpace page. Nowadays, they would be on Flickr. But they were then on her MySpace page, and when she departed from MySpace, all of her circle lost access to their photographs, which were no longer present. This was intolerable to her social circle, which demanded that she return to MySpace. Of course, they had to organize a campaign to get her to return to MySpace, and so they opened a MySpace page called Bring So-and-so Back to MySpace and began organizing there the social campaign to force her to return their memory to them. Of course, she wasn't just returning their memory to them, she was returning her life to the supervision of Mr. Murdoch, which she might perfectly understandably have preferred to avoid. But she was no longer in a bilateral relationship with Mr. Murdoch. Though she had been sleeping with him for years without thinking about it, now she was being pushed back into bed with Mr. Murdoch by all her friends who were deeply self-interested in the possibility that she might otherwise escape the bad polygamous marriage into which they had all fallen. This is not merely an unusual or pathological story, but rather an early model of a nowadays quite commonplace understanding. It is my friends, my family, everybody else who keeps me on MySpace or Orkut or wherever. A lot of emphasis is put on what we might think of as the data protection law of this disaster. Do you have a way of keeping your profile private from other people in the society? And a great deal of time and effort is spent discussing this question, which the operators are delighted for you to spend a great deal of time and effort discussing, because it has nothing to do with the real problem, which is that nothing is secret from the operators. Nothing in particular is secret from the operators and their data mining, even when it is secret from you, That is, even when you do not know about yourself what the data mining reveals. It is, of course, as I said, still possible to change this. There is no intrinsic architectural reason why these services exist, because there is no intrinsic technological advantage which they provide. But when I say that, even young people, comparatively technologically adept as users, will immediately respond, oh, I wouldn't know how to do that. And here you see a failure of proprietary software. Not an unintentional failure, a deliberate failure. There's nothing to prevent a company like, say, Microsoft with, say, $25 billion in cash lying around from developing for you a way for people to have personal web presences which perform all of the functions of interconnecting people and allowing them to know one another, but which leave the logs safely in the hands of the individuals themselves. Nothing, that is, except the profitability interest of Microsoft, which lies in increasing the surveillance of you. The present internet is full of what are called free services supported by advertising. That, like free television supported by advertising, is a gateway to cultural destruction, right? To the reduction of thought and the increase of the inducement of a certain calm, even disposition favorable to marketing and consumption. But it is not necessary in the age of the web, only convenient. Where convenience is a word which means two things: you don't have to think, and others are enabled to think about you without any restriction, let, or hindrance. So, the free software movement, as Raquel has pointed out that I have a political axe to grind, the free software movement does have some freedom to offer here. But it is unfortunately not a freedom which can be grasped individually by persons one at a time. It must be grasped by communities acting for the interest of all of their members in common. What happens if we don't take the step of beginning to retrieve the information about what we read and think about from the hands of the data miners? Well, ask yourself what democratic politics is like when every voter is known, not just a little bit, but completely, by parties who will sell that information at a price. Every election conducted in every society is about determining who will vote and who won't vote, which is far more important than for whom they will vote. Consider what it would cost if you knew every single person in the society really well. Consider what it would cost to change people's propensity to vote by 1%. Consider what the ability to decide what 1% of the population will have something better to do on any given Sunday than vote would do to the control of politics. Consider the same with respect to litigation when every judge is fully known at a price. Consider the same with respect to the conduct of the police function and the enforcement of the criminal law when every prosecutor is fully known at a price. Consider the opportunities for large organizations with respect to the micro-control of behavior when every single person's moments of appetite, whether that appetite is visceral, sexual, religious, or whatever else, are known at a price. Currently, the ability on the part of the operators of the social networks to understand their people is advanced beyond my knowledge or your conception. we are both behind the curve. The models and their accuracy are barely known. Google, as you may know, is among the most obscure businesses on earth. It is very difficult to know what it does or how it does it, even for those of us who walk that beat professionally and who know as much as can be known. The same is true, I might say, with respect to the surveillance activities of the United States government, which have been carried on for the last 7 years in great secrecy and, as we all know, with very little respect for the rule of law. But what we do not know is what will happen in future when those two forces are combined. And they will be. They must be. The technology that capitalism is currently developing to allow us to live rich social lives together is frighteningly defective. Its defects are clear, but inconspicuous to most users. The sources for misuse and the nature of the consequences of misuse are obvious to maybe 6 people, and now you. The reasons why this has happened are apparent to everybody, but little has been done. Fortunately, as I pointed out at the beginning, the profit motive is extraordinarily short-sighted. It is, moreover, very prone to denial. That is to say, organizations seeking profit have cognitive dissonance problems more severe than those that afflict individual human beings. The stock market hates bad news, as capitalism hates competition. So I walked into this room and I sat in the front row and I listened to thoughtful and intelligent people speaking while behind me was a Microsoft Windows desktop. And on that Microsoft Windows desktop, there were 2 browsers, the unfree one and the free one. The Explorer was there, but not even in an altogether Microsoft shop could Firefox be missing, because nobody on earth is left who doesn't know that the Internet Explorer sucks. So there was Firefox sitting right there, even on an all-Microsoft desktop. And the important thing about Firefox for this purpose is that it is very easily and with barely 2 clicks restructured so that it is a browser that eliminates advertising. Consider just for a moment the peculiarity of the fact that after 7.5 versions of the Internet Explorer, it not only won't block advertising, it has no plug-in API that would allow the third-party construction of an ad blocker. Firefox treads, I admit, a rather thin line. It gets, at present, $60 million a year from Google, and if it put the ad blocker into the browser, Google, which lives by advertising, would be less enthusiastic about the Firefox browser. But 1.5 clicks to install AdBlock is not that bad. Those people who wish to stop receiving advertising on web pages, in other words, can. I therefore only need to point out to you that the entire current structure of the great commercial web, all of it, the Google of it, the Yahoo of it, the Microsoft of it, the MySpace, Facebook, Rupert Murdoch of it, all of it depends upon a false assumption that you have to see the ads. Had Mr. Gates triumphed, had the free software movement never existed, were there no Firefox, this would be true. But now the contrary is true. And because we freed a tiny little piece of technology called the browser, because we made it possible to block advertising, the actual determination of whether you are going to live in a totally surveilled society is up to you. All of this surveillance, all of this deliberate construction of social networking for the purpose of creating a terrarium in which you live and can be seen from all angles all the time, and can be emulated more thoroughly than you yourself can emulate yourself, All of that depends upon advertising revenue based on your seeing advertisements when you touch the net. You don't have to anymore, ever. Now, is it inevitable that people all around the world are going to decide they'd rather do without the ads? Probably not. If they think that the only thing they get by looking at the ads is ads to look at, they may be convinced, though the data suggests that when you give people digital control over their media stream, they tend to remove advertisements, as the digital video recorders like TiVo have shown. I think it is therefore likely that within a short period of time, a decade and a half, under ordinary circumstances, the tendency to remove advertisements by digital filtering at the customer's eyeball would take over. And when it does, this vast bubble called Web 2.0, which means not really the better applications for social interconnection, but instead the data mining of everything by the provision of software as a service and the mining of the logs, will collapse. Because the revenue streams which are producing it are revenue streams that exist only by virtue of your willingness to participate. The moment that you, like me or those with whom I deal from day to day, decide to install the ad blocker and disappear from the advertising system is the moment at which Disney and Murdoch and all the others begin to lose interest in surveilling you. Now, the CIA does not lose interest, the NSA does not lose interest, and Mr. Berlusconi does not lose interest, because once again he has achieved the intermediation of state and media at a level which allows the police and the salesman to fuse. But this is, as it was last time I was here, a temporary problem. In particular, a temporary problem if democracy is protected against the consequences of data mining, which returns us to my second point. Our political liberty depends upon these changes, as well as our mental or intellectual liberty. One of the things which happens because of social networking is that my students spend hours, I mean hours, every day, enmeshed in the minutiae of one another's social lives. It very effectively replaces television, which is not bad news to Mr. Murdoch. You see, the problem with presently existing commercial television was you could watch it, but it did not watch back. They fixed that now. This is social networking where we live, but it isn't social networking where we have to live. I have pointed out both what's wrong with the technology and where the simple places are to begin destroying it. I have tried to indicate a little bit what I think the forces are which bring people to it, and I have tried to indicate in as brief a way as I could where the problems are in why people use it and what is done to them for using it. Let us just briefly imagine where we ought to be now and where, with effort, we could be 10 years from now. Everybody in this room should have a small thing, maybe an earplug, maybe a little cube to hang around the neck, maybe a bracelet, a watch, a piece of jewelry, whatever you like. That's a device that belongs to you. It communicates with a free wireless environment around you, and it communicates with a small piece of gear which you plug into the wall somewhere in a place that you consider safely yours, an apartment, an office, or even a bank vault. That personal server is responsible for maintaining your presence on the network. It responds to nobody but you. Each piece of wearable computing equipment which you carry interconnects with it. It provides you free telephone calls to anywhere in the world. It provides you with access to any information you are seeking anytime you are seeking it. It keeps your secrets. It allows your purchases to be debited to your accounts in a secure way without the enormous data protection problems presented by credit cards. It operates your expression of yourself, publishes and streams and distributes what you need, and it acquires bandwidth when it needs more than the free bandwidth that the state should provide to you for those purposes. Certain companies in the world, Siemens, Nokia, Sony Ericsson, and NTT, would be delighted to make these devices, and if they competed heavily to make them, they would be exceedingly cheap. Of course, the major telecommunications network operators would be disappointed to hear me talk about free telephone calls. But just in case you wanted to know the deep secret, Deutsche Telekom is bankrupt, and so's everybody else. Or as the CTO of a major denationalizing telephonic company told me in a meeting that occurred just shortly after the last time I was here in Barcelona, well, he said, with the door shut, we will say that we agree with you. No one will make money moving bits in the 21st century. Yes, I thought, that's right. I'm glad to hear it. So I said to him, well, that's interesting. I'm glad that we agree about that. But it leaves me in a serious question. What's your business? Oh, he said, our business is the delivery of premium content to homes and businesses and the delivery of information about those consumers. Yes, I said, maybe that's right. That's what we hear from our friends in the States, too. But that leaves me two questions. You don't own that content. Mr. Rupert Murdoch owns that content. Is it your business to make him richer? Second, I said, you don't own that content. Mr. Rupert Murdoch owns that content. And if you're right, and the business of the 21st century is supplying that premium content, why did Mr. Murdoch just spend $600 million buying MySpace? Yes, he said, we've heard that theory. And it could be right. And if your MySpace theory is correct, he said, then we're just back to moving bits again. In other words, the social networking software of the present also represents an inevitable challenge to the very telephonic network operation system which is currently attempting to control your communications for its profits, which is trying to live inside your cell phone and your internet connection and this podium and everywhere else. So we have even some potential allies whose short-sighted pursuit of profit can be used to help us war against the inevitable consequences of bad capitalist technology in the age of the social network. But we don't have much time. They're improving the product. If you're not using it now, soon you will be. Because somebody you know, or some group you know, or some group of groups you know, will be pulling you towards it. And once you're there, you'll become more there. And the quicksand will begin to suck you in. And you will be known more thoroughly than you ever set out to be known. And the consequences of how you are known will never be known to you. And if you like that, there was no point in fighting for republicanism in Spain, and there was no point in fighting for the freedom, equality, and brotherhood in France, and there was no point in holding the American Revolution. Because we have been struggling for hundreds of years now for the proposition that our thoughts are free. And we now face a situation for the first time. And I say that with all due respect to the powers shown by totalitarianism in the 20th century, we now face for the first time the possibility of the actual extinction of the freedom of your thoughts. I appreciate that it is the task of keynote speakers to present brief, optimistic, non-controversial propositions to assist in the harmonious conduct of academic meetings. And I know that those who invited me knew better than to think that that was what I was going to do. But I apologize for presenting bad news in English, which I suppose is two faults all at the same time. Nonetheless, I wouldn't have come if I didn't think it was urgent. And I'm delighted to take your questions. Thank you very much.
So, the floor is yours. Any questions or comments or thoughts? Els traductors no ho podran... Ah, ho fas en anglès? És que em sembla que s'ha de... Yes, just go on.
I would provide them in another way. We are fundamentally raising not the question, should people be able to know about one another, but should the information about what they know about one another be centrally stored? We are dealing not with the question, should I publish on my web page what I like or what I don't like? I find myself, as a citizen of the web world, constantly amazed at the extent to which Wikipedia knows more about me than I do myself. It knows more about where I spoke last week and what I said than I do myself. I tend to forget, they tend to remember. So it's not even about the question, should all the information about me be located in a place which I solely control? But look at this. The Facebook logs show how long you spend looking at each Facebook profile belonging to each other person whose profile you inspect. Facebook employees, we have documented record, gossip among one another about relationships, love relationships among people that haven't happened yet, but are about to happen because of the number of times per day that X goes and obsessively looks at the profile of Y, right? We are talking about kinds of detection of human interaction which lie below the range at which Stasi or Securitate or any other really capable totalitarian secret police has ever been able to detect. We're not discussing the ability to express oneself, which I agree with you is absolutely crucial to the extraordinary advantages, liberating advantages of technology. And we shouldn't be discussing interactions between the citizen and the state, which should be subject to very careful self-regulation on the part of state entities. E-government propositions ought to be propositions that are carefully scrutinized with respect to their approach to human dignity. And both you and I, in my glancing experience with your part of the European Commission, know that that is in fact thought that goes on. But if we look behind Facebook and we look behind MySpace, we'll find no such thought going on. Now we will be looking at people who assess how long you look at everything you look at for the purpose of figuring out what you're thinking and figuring out how to predict what you will be thinking the next time you look there. This form of pre-calculation of significant human behavior by parties capable of taking advantage of it is very threatening conduct. But it is difficult, if not immoral, to prevent people from thinking. And therefore, what we must do is to allow ourselves to control more what they can analyze by keeping crucial portions of it to ourselves, not the portions that other people find useful or desirable in our social context, but the portions which others could only profit from at our expense.
Okay, let's agree that the service they provide, it's okay and it's great and everybody wants it and it's good. So what's the business model that you propose in its change? I mean, somebody has to, if we have no ads and we cannot pay with our data, so which are the two main revenues of the people that are providing SNSs. So what's the model behind this, the one you're proposing? I mean, I do want this service. It's okay, you convinced me, I won't pay for ads, I won't pay with my own data, but how do they, it's sustainable?
Well, I think what you're probably asking me is, why does Wikipedia exist? I think what you're probably asking me is, why does free software exist? I think you're probably asking me, why is Firefox, or Linux, or GCC? You see, I'm pointing at the political economy that doesn't have a business model, but has instead a function which results from the extraordinary lowering of the cost of collaboration among human beings and the ability to take advantage of human desire to communicate and to assist one another. I'm talking, I regret to tell you, about socialism. I'm talking about from each according to his ability and to each according to his need, and I'm pointing out that in the world in which we live it works. But I'm not pointing that out for the first time. I'm only pointing that out again in a boring way, because the question, what is the business model, is the same unfortunately boring question. We don't need Mr. Murdoch. We do need Mr. Stallman, you see? We don't need ABC and NBC. We do need Wikipedia, you see. We don't need Facebook and the CIA. We do need Tim Berners-Lee and the W3 Consortium, right? We are watching the growth of another form of social production. As I've been trying to point out in my academic career, away from the actual work I do making trouble, there are certain analogies between what is happening now and the political economy fermentation of the middle 19th century, when certain thinkers were attempting to understand what the alternatives were to concentration of power in a class whose tendency was to produce more and more industrial technology, even past the point where it served its own interests and began to serve the interests of those who didn't like it. We have now the good fortune to live in such an era in history in which we are capable of turning their technological enthusiasm against them. And I'm simply doing what I usually do, which is to point out that if you don't take one side, you're going to live under the command of the other.
Yeah, but if you work with volunteers, you know there's two limitations. One is responsibility, and the other one is commitment. So, I mean, what's the capillarity of the Wikimedia model?
Well, it seems to me what we're really asking about is, can we do things together for the common good, or must we do them separately for private profit? And I don't know. What's the durability of the National Health Service in England, or the durability of the prospect of an actual structure of socialized space exploration? What's the likelihood of the development of public libraries and universities, such as this one? In other words, it is the desire of capitalist institutions to establish their inevitability, to establish that they're the only way of really getting things done. And as I've pointed out, when it comes to technology, what they actually do is they stumble around in the dark looking for a pot of money, and they make things worse. We do, in fact, really now know how to design the technology of the planet for the benefit of the people who live on the planet. We really do know how to make every mind on Earth active and productive and capable of learning everything it wants. We really do understand how 6 billion people can all learn what they want to learn. What we have is the problem that people insist that the gatekeepers get their money in return for that, and I represent the party that just says no.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for a very stimulating presentation. I have a confession to make, which is that I'm a Facebook member. And
that's
also
predictable, you understand.
Yeah, that was very predictable, and I also like Obama very much. But you know, I might try to kind of take my profile down after these lectures. No doubt, a number of us
You will be disappointed to discover that you can't.
I know that it's difficult. Yeah, no, I know that too. I have a question to make. In your, you know, you describe it pessimistic. I wouldn't have described it quite that way, but there was a little bit of optimism when you mentioned that in a decade or a decade and a half, more and more people would be using Firefox and not watching any ads. But at the same time, most of your lecture was premised on the rather pessimistic assumption that most of the population is actively enhancing the surveillance society. And so my question is, how do we get from where we are today to where ideally you'd like to be? And I understand that there's one barrier, which is literacy or skills, technological skills perhaps, and that would be overcome just by, you know, a generation of highly skilled youngsters becoming adults. And the other aspect might be will and ideology. But my question specifically to you is, in addition to spreading the world, which is great, do you have a war plan? And is there any role for governments or administrations to play? Or you think that this just has to be a revolution of the masses?
Well, I'm reluctant to say anything about the powerlessness of governments in the presence of so many powerful government officials, but the difficulty presented for governments is that their measurements of public welfare often deceive them. The European Commission measures the economic welfare of societies, among other things, by counting the number of patents that are issued. This has distorting consequences for an understanding of welfare, and it leaves well-intentioned, energetic government officials seeking public benefit almost inevitably to make bad choices, not because they wish anything except public benefit, but because they've allowed their cognitive machinery to be distorted by private interests which have less than the public concern in view. I don't need to describe the relations between the European Commission and Microsoft at any length to demonstrate that there are counterforces to every wish to do good in the system. I spoke of two forces. One, people's desire to be connected to one another and people's desire to avoid certain kinds of mental interferences. They live now in a world that would have been intolerable to their grandparents. They are exposed to millions and soon to tens of millions of impressions a year, disturbing their thought process, a thing that human beings were never previously asked to do in life. And there is still some residual disinclination on the part of human beings to be all the time advertised to in that way. That may lead people to resist advertising and to occupy themselves with demanding better filtration technology. If they go that way, they will undermine the economic underpinnings of surveillance without actually knowing what they're doing. That is to say, the invisible hand will straighten things out a little bit, and I admit that that was the best optimism I had to offer. The reason that is the best optimism I have to offer is that the rest of what people want, whatever we may call their preference schedule, has come so tightly to be tied to the availability of services which come at drastic but unexamined cost. People are unaware of what happens to their private lives. They are unaware of their digital duplicates. They're unaware of the extent to which data mining is happening to them. And so they make choices which are based upon the fulfillment of their wants without an understanding of the costs they pay. And under those circumstances, no matter how optimistic you are about the human desire to be free or to resist power or oppression, you're left with a doubt, right? People must suffer oppression in order to fight against it. And people don't suffer oppression in any visible or tangible way from the increasing understanding of who they are by forces which wish to manipulate their behavior. In the United States, if you acquire a cell phone nowadays, it must have a GPS chip in it. It must be capable of telling where you are to 5 meters or less. The theoretical reason for this is that if you dial the emergency services, they have to know where to be able to find you. But in fact, the greatest beneficiary will be Kentucky Fried Chicken, which wishes to be able to advertise to people the availability of snacks at precisely the moment in the day when they are most hungry, and at precisely the time when they are close to a KFC outlet. right? The use of the desires of the human being in a predictive model of behavior, allowing tiny interventions to produce large outcomes, is a social process that human beings are poorly adapted to deal with. Our cognitive machinery is poorly adapted to the understanding that that may go on, because for millions of years we've been doing other things. We're not ready yet to incorporate fully that understanding of what is going on around us, and that's the difficulty that's presented. So what's the program of the revolution? Well, I've been pretty thoroughly concentrated on that question for the past 20 years, and there's a certain amount of stuff I can say. First, the revolution in the software layer was absolutely necessary. Without control of the executable portions of the net would become whatever the owners wanted it to be. The war on Microsoft was crucial. I don't know if you have noticed, but we have won. Right? The network is now permanently heterogeneous. No one software monoculture will ever control it. That means there will be necessary diversity, and those who seek freedom can get it. The next big step is to continue the deterioration of the control of media ownership by the ownership of culture. We have, as you note, succeeded in warring on the music industry. It will die. Its attempts to protect itself technologically are now essentially over, though we have one last war to win, the current war here in Europe and in the United States to control internet service providers by making them war on copiers. But we will deal with that, I think, fully satisfactorily. The movie industry will take another decade and a half to die, but it will die too. Mr. Murdoch is the last of his kind, the end game with Mr. Murdoch, though brutal and complicated, is the end game for the ownership of culture. The third step in the revolution is the freeing of bandwidth. We have to succeed in achieving the ability of every human being to receive and transmit on equal terms as a function of the equal dignity and importance of every human mind. I beg your pardon? Well, you know that the electromagnetic spectrum has already been purchased by the Lord God and is available to us for free. So I think the question you're really asking is, when the price of switches asymptotically approaches zero, can we all own all the switches and deal with the thing in a decentralized and unowned way? And the answer is yes. The technology is not the difficulty. The difficulty is the social transformation. Nobody will make money moving bits in the 21st century. So we have two choices. We can let them go broke trying, or we can take the job away from them. The question really amounts to, when do the device builders of the world, Santa's Workshop in Finland and the other places, decide to build that network with us instead of building the other network with them? Mr. Jobs has, as is his habit, intervened on the wrong side quite decisively with beautifully good-looking technology, which has total disrespect for its users, as is his wont, and he has lengthened their life a little bit. But the problems for them are still overwhelming, and our ability to communicate at low expense and near zero is still very strong. We will, by the middle of the 21st century, have eliminated the network operators, I would hope by 2025, when every human being is freely able to communicate with everybody else for the cost of a cell phone or something that costs like a cell phone and affords permanently free communications. We will then be in a position which I think we can call the end point of the revolution. Now the question about our contribution of our data ceases to be all that overwhelming. We contribute our data to one another, and we do so under rules which require us to take care of it.
Em disculpo per parlar en català, però com que hi ha traducció, doncs cap problema. Bé, els dos valors de societat emergent que ha sigut canalitzada a través d'internet són les ganes de compartir, és a dir, tot es fa per compartir, per necessitat i per voluntat, i després l'absència de control. Si avui estem parlant de Web 2.0, probablement és perquè és una societat emergent i és una societat en expansió. I existeixen aquests dos perills, no? El perill de que pel fet de que s'hagi de finançar la web hi hagi control més o menys centralitzat. De totes maneres, per principi democràtic hauríem d'acceptar que aquesta societat emergent ha tingut èxit i que els seus valors són avui dia els valors, diguéssim, regnants a la societat. Ara bé, des del punt de vista en el que aquesta economia i aquest model de societat només es queda en el que és la societat d'informació, internet, xarxes, etc., igual el principi democràtic no està sent molt efectiu. De tal manera que la meva pregunta és, poden arribar aquests valors de la societat emergent a expandir-se als altres sectors de la societat i no quedar-se només a el que seria l'economia d'internet? I segona pregunta, si la resposta és afirmativa, pot ser això, diguéssim, no immediat però a curt termini en el sentit que internet és una tecnologia que agilitza els processos socials o serà un procés de 2 segles com el pas de la baixa edat mitjana cap al renaixement? Gràcies.
Thank you. It's an important question. I've pointed in the past to the very significant distinction between the portion of the economy that has zero marginal cost goods in it, hitherto until the late 20th century, an unimportant part of the economy, and the part of the economy which responds to traditional economic principles in which goods have non-zero marginal cost and every copy of everything must be paid for somehow, and in a competitive market the ultimate consumer winds up shouldering only that additional cost of each additional unit. The digital society of the 21st century becomes increasingly, as we see around us, one in which the manufacturing of goods with non-zero marginal cost is marginal activity. It is pursued at the edges of the developed world. It is the work of the developing economies rather than the developed ones. Increasingly, developed societies produce information goods, goods which have non-zero marginal cost, which can be copied, moved, and redistributed at near zero cost, and where, in a competitive economy, the price that the consumer ought to pay is zero. Most of the phenomena I describe have a limitation in the neighborhood of zero marginal cost. They apply to goods which are digital in character, which can be copied, modified, and redistributed at near zero cost. This does not imply that there are no social effects in the traditional economy. There are extraordinary and complicated social effects in the traditional economy. We see it now in the global IT industry, which lives half in the world of free software and half in the world of hardware and services for sale. The interaction between the new socialist economy in digital goods and the traditional non-zero marginal cost industrial economy is the most complex area in current research. It's where I work every day. Raquel asked that I define the Software Freedom Law Center, and here's actually a useful place to do so. The Software Freedom Law Center is a unique law firm. It operates on behalf of socialism, using millions of dollars a year voluntarily contributed by capitalism for its own destruction. The reason that it does so is that capitalism's short-sighted pursuit of the profit motive causes IBM and Hewlett-Packard, Red Hat, Novell, Nokia, Fujitsu, Hitachi, and others to notice that they are making tens of billions of dollars a year by capitalizing on free software goods. That means that they have a whole renewable natural resource economy they need to have taken care of, and they need forest rangers to take care of it. So, facing them, we look like forest rangers producing for them in a renewable form tens of millions of dollars of capital goods with nearly no investment. From the point of view of the hackers for whom we work, we are, of course, the shock troops of the legal revolution on behalf of their activities, and those activities are not meant to be limited to what profits IBM. The consequences of that liminal position in between the capitalist owners of great wealth pursuing traditional goals in the traditional economy and the socialist entrepreneurs of knowledge for public benefit with no substantial money and no substantial greed driving them is the essence of what I do. What I would say to you about the nature of the limitations is that they are real, but highly mobile. We live in a time of great social plasticity. Small amounts of force at exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, produce enormous changes in the trajectory of the system as a whole. You can't control it. You can't begin to replace it. The real economy is not going anywhere. But the conditions under which it operates are in the process of transformation. And if you look very closely at the blueprints, if you read very closely the dynamics of the alarm systems, if you look very closely at how the badly designed or socially destructive parts of this defend themselves, you can subvert them. You can turn them to the advantage of the new. You can make them serve purposes other than their own. It's only fair. That's exactly what they do to us all the time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so